Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Natural Female Muscle Podcast for episode number 29. I hope that everyone is doing very well and having a wonderful morning, evening, day so far, whenever you get round to watching this. I hope you're all good, and I hope you've enjoyed the past few episodes with a few guests as well. As you guys know, just doing a little bit of a mixture, to be honest, with the solo episodes and the guests with as often as I can kind of get those to work and also just continue to bring out regular content. I'm sure you can all appreciate that, around this time of the year is pretty hectic with a lot of shows and a lot of travel, which is of course amazing and so exciting. But then when it comes to actually trying to organize with guests who, whether they're competing or traveling to shows, and I'm also traveling to shows and things like that, it can be a little bit tricky to organize. And I'd much rather just actually still bring you guys podcasts and also touch upon things that are also going to be, quite relevant and hopefully helpful around this specific time of year as well. So today we are going to talk about something that I feel as though is helpful for a lot of athletes around this time of year, but also just in general. And that's going to be touching upon why you maybe don't feel like a real bodybuilder, or you don't feel like a bodybuilder in general, and essentially feeling that kind of feeling of imposter syndrome, or like you don't really belong, or like you can't really validate yourself. And I actually did a little bit of like a reel this morning talking about this just super briefly. And unfortunately, the main thing that kind of sucks with reels is that I kind of have to try and talk about a huge topic in like under a minute and a half, which is not really me. I mean, anyone who listens to the episodes, I could talk forever about one specific thing. And ultimately, with anything, and this is the thing that I suppose it doesn't really suck about Instagram, but it's that, you can never really tell a full story just through a single post or just through a single video or whatever it may be. With anything that you see, like all of these things have so much more to them. There's always a much bigger story, so many more things that we could realistically actually talk about. But the benefit is that it kind of hopefully draws people in to want to actually be able to like learn a little bit more, which hopefully you guys will get from this one. So this is something that I see a lot through definitely this time of the year with a lot of individuals like on stage, a lot of individuals leaner, a lot of individuals competing. Is a lot of people who maybe aren't in those positions, like will look at those people on stage or look at those people doing those things and be like, oh my God, I'm nowhere near that. Or, how can I be considering, myself to be a bodybuilder when I see these girls, these individuals on stage and they look amazing. And not to say that you don't look amazing, but you're not in that same position. And so many people feel this, regardless of whether you've competed or not. People can even still have competed and feel like they're not really like bodybuilders still, for a variety of different reasons. And I 100% really struggled with imposter syndrome as a bodybuilder, as a coach, for a really long time. I wouldn't say that I probably didn't feel like an actual bodybuilder until maybe 2021, so a couple of years ago, which I know sounds a bit crazy, but it took me a lot of time. It just shouldn't have taken me a lot of time. That's the biggest thing that I kind of want to run through in this and go through a lot of the things that I felt and that I talk to clients about all the time when they maybe have these feelings, and hopefully help you to understand like that it's okay. And I understand why you feel like that, but you don't need to let yourself truly sit in those feelings and accept those feelings for what they truly are, because it shouldn't have taken me as long as it did to be able to, feel really confident in what I do. And like to the point where, say if I met someone, I'd be embarrassed to say that like I'm a bodybuilder or like this is what I do. I literally used to feel embarrassed for myself. I was like, I can't say that. Like people would just laugh at me. And the amount of people who won't share those interests, like I know that and I feel that. Whereas now, like I love if I meet someone and they tell me what to do. Like, yeah, they're usually like, what the hell do you mean you're a bodybuilder? But I'm excited to then talk about it and tell them like, this is what I love to do on a daily basis. Like, this is also what I do for a job, and talking about these things. So, yeah, be good to kind of dive into these factors that can limit you from being able to do that, and how to work around those and to get to hopefully a position where you don't question yourself there. So firstly, I want to kind of touch on like what I personally see as a bodybuilder. And I see this talked about in podcasts all the time, when like someone will maybe like ask a question and say like, hey, do you think that I'm technically a bodybuilder if I've been training for X amount of time, or I haven't done a show, or this and that? And personally, what I see as a bodybuilder is anyone who genuinely bodybuilds on a day-to-day, somebody who drives the majority of their efforts and the majority of their focus on a day-to-day towards training and nutrition in the pursuit of physique development or a specific physique goal. But of course, mainly physique development, because we're not talking about like, lifestyle fat loss here. This is like developing your physique. That is bodybuilding. Bodybuilding is building your physique. Like that makes you a bodybuilder. And I think the difficulty is it's like, how long do you say that you have to be doing this to class yourself as that? Because like, let's be honest, if you're bodybuilding quote unquote for like a week, maybe you're not a bodybuilder yet. But if you repeatedly do those actions for like several months, I would say, like, yeah, of course you can call yourself, a bodybuilder. It's like so many other things. It's like, if you play an instrument for so long, for consistently, you're probably a musician. If you play a sport at school and you play several matches, or at a club, you're going to be like a rugby player or a hockey player or whatever these things are. So it's like you can call yourself that. And there's a huge difference between being a competitive bodybuilder and a non-competitive bodybuilder. So I think that's where the differentiation lies. Is so many people will say like, nah, you're not a pro, or nah, you've not like won a show or even competed, so you're not a bodybuilder. But like, there is a difference, like there's a difference between being a competitive bodybuilder and being a non-competitive bodybuilder, just like in any other sport. Like any other sport, any other hobby, you can still do all of these things without like competing within that or earning money within that specific field. Doesn't mean that you don't still do that thing. Like how many people are like singers but don't maybe make money through their sole job being a singer, or like do these things? Like they're still doing that thing, so there's so many examples I could kind of like touch upon there. But that's the way that I see it, is like you can still be a bodybuilder without being a competitive bodybuilder. And I do think we actually have, I suppose, the benefit of that now, where there is maybe a much bigger presence on social media of a lot of bodybuilders that don't compete, which is definitely a good thing, because I think it really promotes that you don't necessarily have to do that. Although I know the majority of people listening to this podcast will either be competing or in the pursuit of competing. But I suppose in that sense, the main applicable part is that if you are in the pursuit of competing and you have not yet competed, that does not mean that you cannot call yourself a bodybuilder or believe that you are a bodybuilder until you have stepped on stage. That's a really good way of putting that there. But I suppose when we look at this topic in general, it's for sure applicable to both males and females, 100%. But I don't really think it's a surprise that females struggle with this the most. And I'm going to dive into obviously a lot of the reasons that affects this, but just to like look at this for a second on a wider perspective, and I've been thinking about this a lot lately, just like in general too, is females have to validate themselves for so many things in all areas of life, way more than men often do. And I don't want to dive too deep on this because I could go off on another tangent, but like if I think about all the different things that I've ever been interested in or enjoyed to do, I have definitely always had to validate my ability to do that or my enjoyment of that far more than a male counterpart, particularly when it does come to like sports and stuff. But let's be real, like this also translates into, professional life and work and things like that. Like how often do women generally have to prove their worth to do something far more than a male does? Quite a lot, so it's not a surprise that this does trickle into bodybuilding as well. Like I'm sure so many people listening to this podcast will have had a single instance, that you can maybe think of off the top of your head, whether it's like you want to join in a game of football, or you want to, tell people that you're interested in a sport that, is predominantly enjoyed by males, and you have to validate your enjoyment of that by proving how much you know about it, or by proving that you're physically capable of, playing something. I experienced a lot of that growing up, like a lot of that, because I was the only girl in a very male dominant family, and it's made me very much the way that I am. But whenever I like wanted to join in like playing sports with my cousins and my brother, like they didn't want me to play because I was a girl, or if I enjoyed watching, like a male dominated sport, as I've said, like I had to justify my ability to do that. And if there was a task or a job to do, if there was another male doing it, it would always be like me having to justify that I was capable of doing those things. And that sucks. Like, it's annoying sometimes, but like, this is where we have to learn to move around those things and like actually not let this kind of like discourse that we can't do these things like genuinely be something that we believe. And I think that's kind of coming on from that. I think that's definitely why I kind of struggled with bodybuilding as well, was because with all of the areas of my life, I've never really had like somebody there or like something there that was like, okay, cool, like you like that, that's awesome, like go for it. I was always questioned, so I didn't ever want to come out and be like, I love bodybuilding, this is what I'm doing, and these are my goals, and I'm going to do this, and I love this, and I own this, because I felt like I would be questioned. I felt like people would laugh at me. I felt like people would think that I was silly for doing that, and I didn't have all of the kind of rights and reasons for that. So I suppose this obviously brings me on now to touch upon like some of the main contributors why I feel as though this is such a common trend, and why this really happens, like apart from the reasons I've just been through, and things that I would recommend to combat this, and particularly speaking from my own personal experience, and also things that I touch upon with clients to hopefully help you kind of understand these things and come out the other end of this podcast like feeling more in just ownership and like carrying more confidence, I suppose, in general, with yourself, with your journey, as you should do. So let's kind of start by the first one, which I've kind of just touched upon there, which is that bodybuilding is not generally seen as a sport for females. Like, off the top of your head, I know now we do see a lot more females bodybuilding, and we speak about this a lot in quite a few of the episodes, where it's, in a sense, as I said at the start, it's quite cool how a lot of the view on social media has shifted a lot, where now it's like so common for so many girls to go to the gym, for so many girls to train, for so many girls to weight train. And I think that's amazing, because I think that if I was maybe still 16 now, it would be really different if I was talking about going to the gym, where people would maybe want to do that also, rather than kind of think that I was weird for wanting to do that. I believe from looking at socials, it's a bit more mainstream now. I think more females want to be strong. More females do genuinely want to have more muscle, which is pretty cool. But even still, even with that, I think that we see a lot on socials, and the real life isn't always maybe necessarily reflective of that. And bodybuilding is still, seen as a sport more so for males. And even when we look at the classes, it's kind of why, it's not just purely bodybuilding. We have the female classes, and, we're not really seen as bodybuilders in the same way that males are, even though we are, in the true sense, bodybuilding. It's like, oh no, you're just a bikini athlete or a figure athlete or whatever it is. And it's like, well, that's the way that it's kind of set out for us. It doesn't mean that we're not still bodybuilding. It doesn't mean that we're not still, doing these things. And just because it's purely mainly like for men, or has more so been like a male dominated sport, doesn't mean that we shouldn't be allowed to do that. And I definitely think that over the years, and I'm sure this is something that just comes with like general maturity too, is that you kind of come to peace with owning the things that you actually love to do, and not being afraid of that, irrelevant of what others think. I think when you're younger, or when you're new to something, you are way more paranoid about what people think of what you want to do, and how that makes you look, and all of these things that ultimately you kind of just realize, like, it just doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. You should do exactly what you want to do, exactly what you love, and not be afraid of owning that, because truly nobody can tell you that you can't really do something. They really shouldn't, especially when that's something that you are extremely passionate about, and something that provides you with an extreme amount of positivity into your life. So even though it's not maybe necessarily such a female dominated sport, doesn't mean that females still can't thrive within it. And that's like goes for all areas of those other things that I've kind of touched upon. Like most other sports, unfortunately, which are mainly male dominated, doesn't mean that we can't still have ownership within that, and like not be afraid of doing that. And I've found that time has, like I said, been maybe the best thing here, but just putting myself out there more, and kind of like actually speaking a lot of these things kind of into existence a little bit, like actually beginning to call myself a bodybuilder, actually, like I said, like telling people this is what I do, and having more confidence in myself in general, and even just doing like a little bit of like mindset work and just life goals, and writing down all these things, and changing the way that I perceive myself, and made a huge difference here. And these are all the things that I kind of often talk to clients about, is shifting our perception of ourselves and the way that we think about our goals and what we want to do and what we want to be a part of, and genuinely creating our own self-belief within that, does make a huge difference. So that's kind of the first point, is that way that we view bodybuilding for ourselves and for females in general. The second point is that, and this kind of ties in with the first point, is that women also, when we look at like bodybuilders, they don't often carry that typical bodybuilder look, in the sense of being massive, being very, very defined muscularly. And honestly, this is actually the case, sorry, for both in and out of being in competition. So like being in and out of shape, like it even still stands. Like we don't carry as much muscle mass as males do, like for the most part. So if you were to take your male counterpart, who is like exactly the same as you, has the same kind of level of genetics and response to training, etc., but they're male, like they're gonna have more muscle than us. They're gonna look very, very different. And this is the biggest issue with it, basically what I've just mentioned, which is obviously admitting that you are what you are, is because you feel silly because you don't look the part. Like even as I said, even in season out season, like you can think, okay, I don't look like a bodybuilder, because genuinely in normal clothes, even in the gym, like honest to God, in the gym, in a sports bra, in leggings, or, not having a massive pump or not being super shredded or whatever it is, like most female bodybuilders just look amazing, but we look normal in the sense that there's not really anything like super freaky about the way that we look. Like there's going to be beautiful shape to our physiques. Like this is the biggest thing, is that we see is by carrying a bit more muscle, like we carry like this shape that obviously I'm sure many listeners will think is like beautiful. That's why we love it, because it makes us feel strong. It makes us feel I mean, there's so many different, I don't want to put words in everyone's mouths because everyone has a different way of viewing it, but we don't have, like I say, that kind of freaky look. Like it's unlikely that we're going to be walking around with like massive cap delts and like veins down our arms and like all the time. It's literally just not common. And I think that it's really important to actually put yourself in the real world and kind of surround yourself with a lot of people who actually have trained for years, are top level bodybuilders, and actually just see like, okay, this is actually how they look in real life. This is how they look in normal clothes or whatever it may be, because we just have this expectation that I think we should look a specific way when we actually shouldn't. Like that's not the way that we're meant to look. And this was the biggest thing I kind of touched upon in the reel, is like, of course, it's even more so common when we're at higher body fat levels, because females in off-season comparative to males, we sit at much higher body fat levels. We're going to be probably more so like 25% body fat. So when you're there, you're not going to be seeing honestly much of what's going on. Like, you're really not. And that's fine. That's absolutely fine. This is how we're supposed to look. And this was my biggest problem at the beginning, was that I spent so long being so lean. And I touched upon this in my solo episode, because I was like, if I'm not lean, like, people are gonna like think I'm a joke. Like, people are literally gonna be like, well, she's saying she's a bodybuilder and she looks like out of shape. Like, why is she even going to the gym every day when she looks like she doesn't train? Which is not true. But we create this kind of like, basically, like thought process and this conversation in our head that doesn't actually exist, because I hear it from clients all the time, and I have to remind them that, like, you feel this way because of a way that you perceive bodybuilding, not because of the way that you truly are. And actually being able to appreciate yourself more so for what you're doing on the day to day, as opposed to how you think you should look, is extremely important. Because it's just pointless trying to basically meet an expectation that's not a reality. Like, it's genuinely just silly. Like, it's just not going to happen. It's almost like if you expected yourself, like, the normal was to like pull like 6 plates in the gym, like on a deadlift, right? But that's just not normal. Like, that's pretty freaky to be able to do that. But you're constantly beating yourself up because you're not there. It's like, well, that's not a reality. It's like, actually think about what is genuinely real. And obviously social media plays a huge role in this, which I'll come on to in a second. So that's a huge thing, is the way that we kind of expect ourselves to look as bodybuilders. And the third point is that, you throw being natural into the mix of this, and it's more so the case because, to be honest, even like assisted females, unless you're absolutely, huge at the top end of women's bodybuilding, even they like will feel the same. And I think that sometimes kind of even playing like, oh, the natural card, with things like this, like, yeah, we're going to feel it a bit more. But I think everyone does feel that way. And I do get that a lot when, I share these thoughts with my friends or people that I know who are on the other side of the sport, and they express the same feelings, and you can't discount that. But for sure, like, being natural, you throw that into the mix, like, you really, really do rarely have that trained look that you think you should have, unless you are super lean. But honestly, even when, if anything, when natural females are super lean, especially in like normal clothes, unless you are pumped, unless you are on stage in a suit, like, you're going to maybe, if anything, even feel even less like you train. Like, I actually felt less like I train when I was really lean, because when I am lean, I am literally like 43 kilos. So I feel like a child. I feel like a child. And, you get all the comments of like, oh, you're super skinny or this and that. And I actually think that the benefit of that is that you realize that you can't win. Like, you really, really can't. Like, you think that you need to look a specific way here, and then you think that when you're at a different point, you need to look completely different. And you realize that no matter where you're at, someone is always going to say something that makes you feel like you don't have some worth in where you're at. Okay. And you start to then understand that comment or that thought process is actually pointless. It's pointless worrying about, because it's like you're trying to constantly chase something that doesn't need to be there and isn't going to be fulfilled. Whereas what you actually need is like constant peace and acceptance of like where you're at constantly, no matter what, genuinely. So that's really important, and that kind of helped me a lot to appreciate, and especially through spending a lot of time in even off season where I've gone like up and down, because I have still done diet phases, and I have also been at the other end where I've been very lean for long periods of time. And I know that the actual way that I look does not dictate the person that I am, or the thing that I am, or the thing that I do constantly. And obviously, because bodybuilding is massively dictated by the way we look, we think that that should be the sole thing that indicates what we think of ourselves, and it isn't. And the fourth point here is probably one of the biggest things that does affect this nowadays is social media, because this plays the biggest role in what we expect of ourselves. And I definitely see it a lot on reels and TikToks, especially now, because it's very much all about like fast content, content that grabs you in, something that makes you look ultimately more attractive than other people, or as attractive as possible, because that's what it's all about. And it has its positives, it also really has its negatives, in my opinion. And I have to be very careful for myself with the amount of time I spend, looking at content that's related to, bodybuilding or training or things like that, because I guarantee that probably almost everyone listening to this episode will have had a moment where they've seen a reel, they've seen a TikTok, they've seen something of somebody else and thought, well, they look like an amazing bodybuilder. They look fantastic. And I look like this. Why bother? Like, the amount of people I've spoken to that feel like that at points is outrageous, or feel like they're doing something wrong because they don't look like this person who's eating this food, or looks like this, or has been training for this long, and they look like this on this reel. And it's just all a load of BS. Like, honestly, it really, really is, because we see, especially the main thing with the social media is like, it's often individuals who are like leaner, or either just genetically gifted people, which is like, why are we paying attention to circumstances that really don't matter and also don't change anything about ourselves? Like, the more that you sit and you stare at that person, or you think that they look better than you, it's not going to change anything about who you are. And it shouldn't, because you're exactly as you are, because that's how you're meant to be, and this is the person that you are, and that's okay, and that's fine. But we just create these silly expectations based on something that honestly often doesn't even exist as well. And how often, and this is not to be negative, but how often do you also see people who are, trending on reels, or trending on this and that, and they actually do a show, and the way they look on stage is nothing like what they look like in their reels or in their videos or in their pictures. And that's like not me slandering those people, but it shows you a reflection of saying, like, don't believe everything that you see, or don't judge your own self-worth or how you think you should be looking in like your at home morning check-in pictures because of how somebody else looks in an Instagram reel. It's just silly, it's just pointless. It's not really bodybuilding. Like, it's not. Like, I think we sometimes get overly fixated on like pictures and videos and things and all of this, whereas like, if you actually just remove your phone, like remove social media, remove the internet, obviously don't, because you couldn't listen to this podcast episode if not. But bodybuilding is training, bodybuilding is eating, bodybuilding is growing or pushing your body to a new level. And then if you're competing, bodybuilding is getting on stage and standing on a stage and being judged. That's it. It's not, what does your checking pictures look like? It's not, what did this picture look like in the gym, or how did I look like in this reel compared to this person? Like, these are things that actually don't matter. They honestly don't. And I think that sometimes it's really good for us to like remove from those situations, so that we can think like, genuinely, how would I feel about this if social media didn't exist? Or how would I feel about this if the internet didn't exist and I didn't know about this person, and I didn't know about, how this could be done, or whatever it is. I think so many things would be a lot simpler. I love social media. I'm not gonna like discount, like say any bad things about it, because I think it brings so many amazing things as well. But you have to give yourself that perspective every now and then when you find yourself falling down that hole a little bit, because we all fall down those holes every now and then. Like, I think anyone who says that they've never fallen down a little bit of a comparison hole, or thought anything negative after seeing something, like, I mean, to be fair, I mean, fair play to them if they haven't, because that must be really nice. But most people do feel like that, and have had those moments at some point in their life if they have existed on the internet. And pulling yourself out of them is really important. But also controlling the content that you also consume is really important, because, like I said, catch yourself when you notice it, and really catch yourself if it's happening frequently. If it's happening frequently because of specific things that you watch, like, pull yourself away from it. And I often recommend to people, and this is something that even I do myself, is, audit who you follow, audit the content that you consume. And if you find that, looking at specific things is like massively overly stimulating your brain in a bad way, like creating over comparison, like, just don't consume that content or be mindful with how you consume it. Like I will selectively follow the people that I follow, and if somebody does make me feel negative, I would be careful with that. I will make sure that, to be honest, like on my YouTube or on other social media sites, there's like very little bodybuilding content there, because it's nice for me to actually come away from that world and not have to worry about the comparison with that there. So, it's find what works best for you, and manage that well on that front. So that is point number 4. Point number 5, that kind of comes into maybe why you don't like feel like a bodybuilder, could be to do with your environment. It could be to do with like the community that you're in, and that is what you are in, or maybe the lack thereof, the community that you have. And often this is because you maybe don't know many people in the bodybuilding industry, you don't feel a part of it. So especially as a result of that, you'd feel silly to say that you maybe do something because you don't know many people within the sport. You don't feel included as such within that industry. And ultimately, like, you really don't need to be totally immersed in that world for you to like validate actually being a part of it, because that's totally on an individual preference basis. Like, some people want to be really involved in the bodybuilding industry and have all their friends be bodybuilders and, go to all the events, and that's amazing. And other people don't. And that's also totally fine. But I think that you have to do what makes you feel the happiest within your journey, I suppose. And from my own personal experience, I did find a huge benefit from coming out of not knowing anyone to meeting other people and feeling more included, because not that I needed other people to really validate what I was doing, but I realized that I was actually a part of something, and what I was doing was actually right. And, I did actually love this thing, and I met other people who also love that thing. And I found how I was inspired by the way that they felt so confident and so content and so happy in what they were doing, that it was literally inspiring for me. And that's where, either creating that digital or real like community does make a huge difference. So I have to say that, moving to Ultraflex and meeting the people that I did probably played the biggest role there in increasing my confidence as a bodybuilder, as a coach, as in just everything when it came to bodybuilding. It really, really did. Through those that I spoke to, through those that inspired me, through all of those things. So I think that, if you actually allow yourself to find community, then it does really help. Even if it's just one person, it could be a coach, it could be someone that at the gym. It doesn't need to be very much, but it can really help. It might not for you, that's cool, but it can really help. I mean, even just like listening to a podcast or something can help, like, be a part of things. And I think that is really important, because like as humans, we do really value like community, we value relationships, and that can then really positively reflect the way that we feel about like life in general, the things that we like to do, and obviously when it comes to a specific thing like bodybuilding, it's super helpful. So those are kind of the main 5 things, I suppose, there. And I think when I kind of try and round all this up and I think about some of the main tips that have helped me and that I would recommend when it comes to appreciating yourself as a bodybuilder, it would be the following. So it would be appreciating how you're supposed to actually look, monitoring the content that you consume or truly intake from socials in order to help you with this process as well. Focusing more so on your actions, what you do, what you love, as opposed to your outcomes or the visual outcomes that you see. Remember that you are what you are based on truly what you do on a daily basis, as opposed to anything else that you feel as though you should be. Aligning your environment to increase your involvement, and ultimately just not being afraid of actualizing what you really want to be. The more that you believe you either can't do something or you aren't something, then the more you won't be. Yeah, whereas when you really embrace what you want to be, you'll only truly thrive further within that, and I really mean that. So hopefully that's been a nice like little listen for today. Mainly just me again kind of rambling through these things, but something that I think is important to be emphasized. And even if you're just having like a day where you've felt like this yourself, hopefully you can come back to this and just kind of give yourself those thoughts, because sometimes when we have those moments, as we all do, you kind of just have to give yourself a bit of a chat and you go, you know what, like I don't need to feel like this. So yeah, hopefully it has been somewhat of a helpful one. If you have listened to this, if you have enjoyed it, either share and tag myself, tag the podcast, or pop me a message if you have like any things that you want to talk about with any of the things that I've spoken about today, or any questions or any of your own struggles that you're maybe having with this specific issue. And I'm always like all ears and happy to talk about these things. So please do pop me a message if you do need. But yeah, thank you so much for listening to this episode if you have made it all the way through. And I will be back next week with another one as always.